Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here. Today we're going to continue our series where I look at classic Doctor Who seasons that haven't been released in the collection range and kind of talk about if I was the one designing the art for them, how I would do it. And today we're going to be looking at Season 4, Patrick Troughton's first season, which sadly is largely missing with only 10 episodes out of 43 intact. But luckily we have had a lot of this season animated with hopefully more animations on the way. Now, I think of this season in a blue color, darker than the season 2 blue, but not as dark as what I want for season 11, which is the dark blue that the Metabolus crystal is. So kind of a middle ground between that, halfway between this light blue and the Metabolus 3 crystal blue, which is more of a cobalt. Somewhere kind of in the middle there, maybe a little closer toward the light side, is kind of what I picture as the primary color. Now, there may be a secondary color, like this one has a splash of yellow in it, maybe. Again, you could go with the howl around effect. I don't know if they will do that for all of the 60s box sets. You could, to keep the 60s one having a more simplistic look to them, because the 70s ones kind of have a certain style, which is very different from the 80s ones, which also kind of have their certain style. And so the 60s could also have their very certain style, and it could be a more simplistic one with different variations of the howl around, possibly. I would be fine with that. I think Troughton should definitely be holding his recorder. Someone mentioned this in the comments recently, and I completely agree. He needs to be holding his recorder. To me, this is the season where he really uses his recorder a lot. It's the season I think of with him using it the most. I think he could either be holding it in his right hand. I think he could also be holding it in his right hand and the 500-year diary in his left hand. Like you've seen the pictures, of course, from Power of the Doctor of him holding both, one in one hand, one in the other. He could be doing that, recorder here, 500-year diary here, or he could be playing the recorder. I'd be fine with that. There are several shots of him playing the recorder, or at least a handful of them. So he could be playing the recorder. That would be nice, because I do very much think that season 4 will be the final Troughton season. I think we'll get season 6, then season 5, and then quite a ways from now, season 4. So by then we'll have already had a couple Troughton seasons, so I think it'd be a good way to cap off his run is possibly him playing the recorder. If not, you could have him smiling, like as he's holding the recorder with that little impish smile he can do. And he definitely needs a twinkle in his eyes. It's another reason I want blue for this season, to kind of go well with those sharp blue eyes of his, because you don't really see that in black and white. But when you see him in his reappearances later in the series, Troughton has some very, very blue eyes. They're a very contrast to his dark hair. There's something I noticed about him immediately. So I think a blue background to go with his very blue eyes would work really well. And he needs to have that little mischievous twinkle in them, I think. For the villainous covers, for the villains on the cover, with 9 stories, I don't think you need one from everything. Like from the smugglers, what would you put? A pirate, maybe? I've never seen the smugglers. Maybe one of the smugglers. I don't really think that's necessary. You definitely got to have a Mondasian Cyberman, at least one. Personally, I'd put a couple of them. They look threatening. That's probably the most creepy and scary the Cybermen have ever looked. The Mondasian Cybermen here, and of course how they looked in World Enough in Time. It's just a creepy design where you very much realize, hey, these things used to be human, and now they've mutilated themselves into a parody of a person. Very creepy looking, so you got to have one of them on the cover. Now, I also think you have a moon-based Cybermen as well, the one that are more similar to the tomb look. I think you have both on there to represent both stories. It's a very Cybermen-heavy season. I mentioned that when I was doing season 5, that you needed a tomb Cyberman and a wheel Cyberman to get both looks. You need that here. You need a Mondasian Cyberman and you need a moon-based Cyberman, both of them represented on the cover. The Daleks, you gotta have Daleks. With 2 of the best Dalek stories ever made in the same season, you gotta have the Daleks. One, you've got to have the Emperor Dalek for evil. He needs to be the one that's up at the top in the center, basically where Kronos is on season 9, that one at the very top right up here. That's where the Emperor Dalek needs to be. He needs to be up there with his lights on like he's talking. And then I think you need multiple Daleks, since there are 2 Dalek stories, 2 very important Dalek stories. I think you have one of the regular Daleks and one of the Black Dome Daleks, the ones that are more his elite guards. You have both of those, the Black Dome Daleks and the regular Daleks. both of them on the cover, because Evil and Power are just phenomenal stories. I don't really know what you'd put from Highlanders. I mean, you could put, I guess, one of the British Royal Guard or one of the British soldiers, the Redcoats. But I don't know how well that would go over with the British population, so you might not want to do that. Of course, you could also just put the guy who's the clerk, the guy who's, you know, tricking all the people into selling themselves into servitude, basically. Tricky's not the right word, but it's a bit tricky. You could put him on there, but again, you don't really need anything from the Highlanders, really, because there's so many villains this season. Now, for Underwater Menace, you could put one of the fish people, because that is an interesting design, or you could put the mad scientist guy, and I know it starts with a Z, you know, nothing, and say, well, it can stop me now. You could put him on there with his look. I think the fish people would be better. And then for the Macra, you got to have the Macra. There's that very famous camera picture of the Macra, like at this angle, looking up, you got to have the Macra. And I do think you use an actual photograph, not like an animation look. Again, everything needs to be photographs. So they all line up on a shelf good. And I think for faceless ones, you need the chameleon in its natural form. There is that famous shot of it like this. I think you kind of need that. I mean, you could also have one of the guys who's the flight captains with the ray gun there. I'd be fine with that. He has a menacing look to him. The guy who's like, you want to know what's going on? I'll show you. Him, the actor, has a really menacing look. You could have him on the cover and a chameleon on the cover. That's what I would do there for the villains on the front. It's a full season of them. For the back of it, I think I'd have the TARDIS flying to the moon, like it's about to arrive on the moon for the moon base. Like you could have the TARDIS spinning about to land with the moon right here, and you can see the little moon base on the moon right there as it's about to land on it. I think I'd go with that. A couple different things for the flap. Actually, I think the main one for the flap I would do is the TARDIS in the snow for the 10th planet. It would be a nice way to include a First Doctor story on the cover that still looks good. And even modern Who fans would like it because it would tie in with Twice Upon a Time. So you have the TARDIS covered in snow with snow raining all around it. You could have Ben and Polly banging on the door to get in if you want. That's optional. A really clever thing was if you had the TARDIS on the flap with all the snow around it, and then in the background where you could barely see it, you have 12's TARDIS. Because it was supposed to be like 70 feet away. You just barely sneak it in, where in the back you can kind of see 12's TARDIS parked a little away. You could do that. That would be a nice little nod to modern Who. And then if they ever get to doing modern Who in it, you could actually, when it gets to World Enough in Time, for the Series 10 one, you could have Capaldi's TARDIS in the snow with Hartnell's TARDIS there in the background. That would be some beautiful symmetry. I want that now. I want that now. For the booklet, I would have Daleks on it. Again, you either go Cybermen or Daleks. And I know the Cybermen are kind of Troughton's villains, but this is the only season we get Troughton with Daleks. So I would have the Daleks on there kind of surrounding them, and with Troughton and Jamie, maybe. And you could go either way there. You could have Ben and Polly, or you could have who's with them? Victoria. Or you could just have Jamie and the Doctor, or you could just have the Doctor, you know, kind of like he is in Power when one's targeting him. You could just have him, oh no, with Daleks all around him. That would work for me. But definitely Daleks is how I would go for the booklet. The interior, you could do a couple things for the interior TARDIS shot. One, if you wanted to be subtle, you could just have the Macra Terror claw on the scanner for the beginning of Macra Terror with the claw there. And whether or not you wanted to have the characters standing in the TARDIS pointing at it is up to you. They normally don't in the booklet, but I'd like a little Easter egg of having the claw on the screen. Or you could have the First Doctor on the ground. You could have it at the end of the 10th planet with the First Doctor on the ground with a little regeneration maybe coming out of his hands. Kind of like they did with Colin Baker for the season 24 box set with Colin and Mel on the ground and regeneration on his hand. You could have Hartnell on the ground like he's about to start regenerating. Here's where season 4 gets tricky. The disc. That went down wrong. That really went down wrong. do they have to split season 4, or can they do season 4 in one set? That gets really hard. There's 9 stories in this season. It has to at least be 9 discs, which the biggest one thus far, season 2, is 9 discs, and it's a big boy. So it has to at least be 9 discs. I think you need to keep it to 9 or 10 discs. I don't think that format could handle anything else. And if you tried double stacking the trays, that might make the trays too heavy. We already have enough trouble trying to keep the trays from coming undone. You add more weight to them, they're definitely going to come undone. So you don't really want to go over 10 discs. Better to keep it at 9 discs. But you start running into the problem of so many of these stories have so many different versions of them. How do you fit that on one disc without compromising the stories? Because you can only put up so much on one disc before you start having to compress them, and then you run into compression issues. And nobody wants all 3 versions of a story to look crappy because they're trying to force it on one disc. Nobody wants that. What's the point of buying that if I can watch my individual releases where it looks better? And several of these stories in this season, especially with the modern way they do animations, are going to have 3 versions. You're going to have a color version, a black and white version, and the recon. You can't cut the recon because there's a lot of people who don't like the animations. They would be steamed they didn't get the recon. But then if you cut the color or black and white versions, you have to go into the problem of which one. Which one do you keep? Which one do you cut? Most of the modern animations are made with the color version as the primary version, with the black and white version made more to appeal to people who are more traditionalist and want their 60s era to be in black and white. But if you cut the color version to stick with the black and white version, which several of which are cropped to 4:3, again, to look proper the way they should for the time period, you're going to have people who are upset that the color versions aren't included. Now, this would be good for maintaining the value of the individual releases. These would maintain their value and people would still buy them because they'd want the color black and white and reconstructed versions. But since these box sets are supposed to be the definitive versions, people are going to want all 3 versions. But how are you going to fit those on one disc? Especially something like Evil of the Daleks. That's 21 episodes. How are you going to do that? Or even Faceless Ones, 18 episodes. Those 2 would at least have to have 2 discs. Boom, we're at 11 discs already. 11 discs. I don't know if this format would work with 11 discs. I just don't know. Then, so you come to the problem of, do you have to split this box set into 2 volumes? Like a season 1 part 1 and season 4 part 1 and season 4 part 2. Then you're going to have people upset because they're having to pay twice as much money to get the whole season. And they're going to be upset because a lot of the season is animated, so they're already going to be feeling chipped that they're not getting the actual episodes. And you can't just split season 4. Nobody wants to see a shelf of 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, all on and on. You'd probably need to split part 3. Considering the shape part 3 is in, people are already going to complain if you release part 3 the way it is now, with it's mostly recons. People are going to complain by the whole season. If you split it, people are going to riot. So you would have to animate most of season 3 that's missing. Everything except one story. I think that's maybe their go-to. Everything has to be animated except one story. Or every story, all of the 60 seasons have to be complete, maybe minus one story. Like with the Crusade. Maybe that's the route they'll go. Which means they'll have to do a lot of animations for season 3 to split season 3. Because that would be a little more palpable to do season 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4. Having a part 1 and part 2 for 3 and 4. That way Hartnell and Troughton are both getting an extra box set. Of course, then you're going to have to fill it up with stuff to make it worth people's value. And some people are already going to feel like they're being cheated because they're having to pay twice as much for a season. But again, if you cram everything into one set, how do you make that work? How do you make that viable when we're already up to 11 discs? And that's not counting like Macroterra, which would be 12 episodes, 4 color, 4 black and white, 4 reconstructed, plus all the bonuses for it. How do you cram all of that in one disc without compression issues? Because, I mean, the individual release is what, 3 discs? Well, at least the steelbook. I think the regular one might have been 2. So how do you make that work? I don't have the answer for that. I mean, I really think you can't go over 10 discs and make it work. But how do you do that in just 10 discs without splitting the box set? I don't have the solution for that. I'm curious to see what they do. That's a long way off. Seasons 3 and 4 are a long way off. I expect those to be respectively the last Hartnell season and the last Troutman season released. Makes sense to do it that way. So it's not something we have to worry about for a little while, although I'm sure the team working on the sets already have a battle plan for it, hopefully. But I'm curious to see the route they're going to take with season 3 and season 4 because of that. So that's how I would do the art for season 4 if it was a single box set release. I would like to know what do you think of this list and how you would do it and how you think they should tackle the animations and the disc space and whether they should split any of the sets or keep them all in one. So comment down below and let me know your thoughts on seasons 3 and 4. Other things to do, don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button. That helps me out and I certainly appreciate it. My goal in 2023 is to reach 1,000 subscribers. We're well on our way towards that, and I appreciate each and every one of you. I also have a Patreon. If you would like to support me that way, that does help keep the bills paid, especially lately. So I very much appreciate that. My entry-level tier is only $2 a month. I also want to give a shout-out to some of my top-tier patrons, Stephen Crane, Colin Coney, and Finn Perkins. I do appreciate their support, as I do the support of all of my patrons. I have a P.O. box if there's anything you would like to send me, Doctor Who related or otherwise. It is a sci-fi channel after all. And a link to my Amazon wish list with all sorts of little goodies is there as well. Most importantly though, thank you for watching.